Well, once again, free speech is under attack from a small group of Muslim fanatics, this time in Canada, where Maclean's magazine is being hauled before a couple of laughably named human rights commissions for printing an article about the threat of militant Islam to our freedom in the West and our boneheaded complacency in the face of it. A group of law students saw an opportunity to be offended by this because they'd been waiting for just such an opportunity, of course, and they pounced on it like pigs on truffles. And they don't want justice here because they know that justice would tell them to go and screw themselves. What they want is legal victory, a completely different thing, and they've got that before the case is even heard, because even if it's thrown out, it will still incur great expense for the defendants, for the magazine, not the plaintiffs. It will cost them precisely nothing. And if precedent is anything to go by, it'll be decided not on whether there was any truth in the article, but on whether anyone's precious feelings were hurt, or might have been hurt, and how certain members of the unelected commission feel about that. Now, this case is important to all of us in the West, because if this is tolerated, it will start to happen everywhere. Newspapers and magazines that are even mildly critical of political Islam will be under pressure to censor themselves or face another expensive lawsuit brought at no cost and with the complacent connivance of a guilt-ridden, patronising liberal establishment of self-haters and hand-wringers who are so ashamed of their own culture they can't stop apologising for it, and who in doing so give us every reason to be ashamed. So what if a few fanatics are offended? It won't do them any harm. It'll give them an idea of how the rest of us feel when we are confronted with cases like this. On the other hand, and let's face it, there's always another hand, unless you're a Saudi Arabian shoplifter, of course, hurt feelings can be quite traumatic. I've heard that it can take seconds, sometimes even minutes, to get over it. So I'm not a bit surprised that Canadians are sympathetic, because they're a very warm and welcoming people. And I know this because I lived and worked there for several years. So I also know that they're not fools. And they can see they're being taken for a ride here, that their well-meant humanitarian laws are being twisted and used against them by people to whom the very idea of human rights is blasphemy. They can see that bringing this case is nothing but an act of legal terrorism, a low-down, dirty little stunt with no moral weight whatsoever, and that those who indulge it and who connive with it are not only making fools of themselves, they're making a fool of their country, when they'd be far better employed focusing on the genuine human rights of young girls shipped off to forced marriages or murdered for refusing to go. You want my opinion? No? Good. Here it is anyway. I think this cynical stunt will backfire. Far from intimidating people into silence, I think this will encourage free speech and make those of us who care about it doubly determined to speak out. Look what happened with the cartoons. The famous one with the turban bomb, that's all over the internet now, and it will always be all over the internet. It will never go away. If they hadn't made a fuss, it would have been forgotten long ago. Every incident like this will simply put a little more steel into people's resolve not to accommodate political Islam. We already know in our hearts there's no reason why we should have to accommodate this repressive medieval ideology, which most of us in the West, frankly, don't want anywhere near our society. And we should be entitled to say that openly and freely, without fear of persecution. Free speech is not negotiable. If we allow it to be compromised even slightly here, they'll continue to chip away at it by whining and complaining and suing until they've worn it right down. You know they will, and so do they. And if we let that happen, our children will never forgive us. Some say that the Western world is already well on its way to hell in a handbasket. Well, maybe not quite in a handbasket. We'll have to wait and see if we can stretch the budget that far after Halliburton and Blackwater have taken their cut. But we are on a slippery slope. Freedom is cheap to us now because we're governed mainly by people of my generation who have never had to fight for the liberty that they abuse in such a cavalier manner and take so much for granted. They don't value it for themselves because they don't know its true value. And they certainly don't value it for the likes of you and me. So if you're happy about that and you're content for your freedom to be filtered through other people's narrow beliefs and prejudices, then you can roll over and go back to sleep now. But if, like me, you're not happy about it and you hear somebody demanding special privileges based on their faith, then you're entitled to let them know exactly what you think about their demands. You've got as much right to be offended as they have. The dhimmi human rights Stalinists will try to shut you up, of course, because free speech puts them out of a job. But if enough people speak out, they can't drag us all in front of their poxy commissions, their preposterous toy town star chambers. They can't turn us all into criminals for having a free opinion in a free country. It's utterly ridiculous that we should have to trip over other people's unprovable beliefs every time we turn around. We treat the religious with more consideration than we treat the disabled. How long before the women on these absurd commissions start wearing headscarves out of respect? It can only be a matter of time. You know, I think ordinary Muslims in Canada who just want a peaceful life, as I know most of them do, I think they could argue that by taking on this bullshit case and giving it publicity it doesn't deserve, the Human Rights Commissions have themselves unnecessarily increased tensions and resentment towards Muslims, and perhaps even made it more likely that they'll be abused. And I think any Muslim who took that one on and who sued these unelected, self-righteous non-entities right back into the cosy PC universe they live in would become an instant national hero. Ain't that the truth, oh Canada? Peace, eh?